coming on the air with this 7 News special report at this hour because this is news that affects the entire South Florida community, generations of Cuban Americans who live here. We have learned this morning that Fidel Castro has died. I'm Craig Stevens.
I'm Baltiz Naray on the special late edition or early morning edition, depending on how you want to look at it, of 7 News. We just got the announcement a short while ago that the former Cuban leader has died, 90 years old. The announcement made by his brother and now president, Raul Castro, we understand, announced on Cuban state television by Raul, but at this point it's late in Cuba, early morning, almost, it seems like people on the island not even 100% clear on what's going on at this point.
Evidently, the announcement was made by Raul Castro on state television earlier this evening at the conclusion of some sort of program where he confirmed that his elder brother had died earlier this evening, or I should say earlier Friday evening, at the age of 90.
Not a lot of fanfare, just as you mentioned, an announcement by Raul at the end of some sort of announcement on the Cuban state television. And at this point, from what we've been hearing, there may be cremation as early as tomorrow of Fidel Castro's body. So it seems like the folks there on the island want to move quickly and smoothly with the situation that's happening there as a result of Fidel Castro's death. He's been sick, as we all know, for many, many years now. He stepped down in 2006, ceding power to his younger brother, Raul.
In recent days, I think just a few days ago, there were published remarks where he indicated he thought that would be his last time addressing the Cuban people. It seems as though he knew his death was imminent. Just a couple of days ago, I think that was, and as you mentioned, an intestinal problem forced him to give up power to his younger brother in July of 2006, and yet, even in the 10 years that have passed, he has still been a vocal player, albeit off the main stage, but his columns, his remarks frequently appeared in Granma, the state-run newspaper. We often saw photo opportunities when leaders from, say, China or Venezuela would visit the island. They would pay the ailing former Cuban leader a visit at his residence. But in the photos, seldom video, but in the photos that we've seen in the last several years, the state of decline was pretty clear that he was ailing and in fact was nearing the end of his life.
Definitely the once big, larger-than-life dictator, very frail, very slim, always wearing those track suits in the photos that we would see. There wasn't, lately we haven't seen a lot of him in public, but we would see those occasional photographs released by Cuban media of Castro, Fidel Castro, with visitors that would come to see him, and he did always look very, very frail.
Again, if you are just joining us, 7 News live coverage, the death of Fidel Castro. Here now, a look back at his life.
Yo, fuck that nigga.
Fidel Castro was many things to many people. He was a charismatic leader who brought education, healthcare, and the dignity of nation sharing to even the poorest and blackest citizens. To leftists around the world, especially those resentful of U.S. power and influence, he was an inspiration. What they want is to bury injustice and the lack of opportunity. To people who refuse to take him seriously, he was a cartoon revolutionary with his fatigues and cigar and marathon speeches. Everybody in the world knows that my speeches are not brief. To every American president since the late 1950s, Fidel Castro was a thorn in the side. Eisenhower watched Castro's popular revolution quickly become a communist revolution. Kennedy bungled an invasion by Cuban exiles, tried to have Castro killed, and nearly went to war over Soviet missiles on the island. Johnson began bringing over flight after flight of Cubans unable to tolerate life under Castro. Nixon and Ford watched Castro's influence spread throughout Latin America and then to Angola. Carter couldn't, or wouldn't, stop a tidal wave of Cuban refugees and cast-offs from reaching South Florida from the port of Mariel. Reagan saw a communist collapse in Eastern Europe, but not on his southern doorstep. Bush signed the optimistically titled Cuba Democracy Act in an attempt to liberate the island by tightening the trade embargo. Clinton struggled with a second influx and was pressured into tightening the trade embargo even further after Castro's MiGs killed 4 Cuban Americans flying light planes for the exile group Brothers to the Rescue. Even when he finally did release his grip on power, his occasional appearances kept him in the headlines, outlasting George W. Bush's presidency and living well into Barack Obama's. Through it all, Fidel Castro remained a player on the world stage and arguably the most significant person in South Florida's post-war history. In great measure, Greater Miami looks the way it does, eats the way it does, talks the way it does, and does business because of Fidel's sent to South Florida. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, born in 1926 in Oriente Province, Cuba, in comfortable circumstances to a Spanish immigrant father and a Cuban mother. He was educated by Jesuits, played sports, went to the University of Havana, got into politics, got married for several years, got a law degree, then on July 26, 1953, got more than 30 of his comrades killed in an abortive raid on an army barracks. Castro went to jail for a while, then went abroad to Mexico and the United States, trying to build enthusiasm and trying to raise money for his revolution. On November 20th, 1955, Castro spoke to 1,000 Cuban exiles in Miami at the Flagler Theater, where students presented him with a huge Cuban flag. On December, Cuba secretly from Mexico aboard a boat named Grandma. From their hideout in the Sierra Madre, they were the regime of Fulgencio Batista, then ride victoriously into Havana and take over. The most significant American response came 27 months later in April 1961. The U.S. launches an abortive invasion of Cuba, withdrawing crucial air support and sending secretly trained exiles to death and imprisonment at the Bay of Pigs. Later, President Kennedy is presented with a Cuban flag at the Orange Bowl. He says he will return it when it flies over a free Cuba. The debacle at the Bay of Pigs becomes the defining act of martyrdom for Castro's enemies in Miami and the defining act of Yankee hostility for Castro's supporters on the island. In short order, Cuba becomes a close ally of the Soviet Union, reaping economic rewards during the Soviets' heyday and falling into economic ruin after the Soviets' collapse. The huge public rallies become smaller and less frequent. Castro's bombast becomes somewhat muted. Gasoline becomes scarce, blackouts become common, Cubans become pessimistic. And when Cubans get pessimistic, many of them head for the United States.
My mother and my nephew.
Finally, under pressure, Fidel, the inflexible revolutionary, began bending a bit, legalizing the ownership of dollars, permitting some foreign investment, mostly in tourism, putting on a blue suit and chatting up business people in New York, loosening restrictions on the church, even during his 71st year meeting with the Pope. But even as his dark gray beard gave itself up to gray, the man whose credo was socialism or death would not give up any of his power. Neighborhood enforcers kept dissenters from organizing. Castro kept insisting political reform was unnecessary. Year kept stubbornly following year. His aging enemies stubbornly kept imagining scenarios for his downfall. And still the stubborn old revolutionary refused to go away. Many of the enemies he hadn't shot or imprisoned, he managed to outlive. History's judgment? It will no doubt fall somewhere between the judgment of his worshippers and the judgment of his enemies. There also is no doubt that Fidel Castro leaves a deep, deep footprint on the island of Cuba, on southern Florida, and on the post-war politics and policy of the United States of America. And that was, if you were just joining us, an obituary to former Cuban leader Fidel Castro.
Yo, fuck that nigga.
This morning, at the age of 90, it strikes me that in all the years, that 20 plus that I've been here, 25 years, there were always these moments where you'd get on Cuban radio, here, exile radio, that Castro had died, and all the rumors, and then a day or two later he'd appear. But in this case, he's not going to appear again because the announcement was made by Raul Castro himself a little while ago.
In case you're just tuning in, this announcement just came via Raul Castro, Fidel's younger brother, via Cuban State TV. He was on the TV discussing something else, and towards the end of it, made the announcement that his brother had died at the age of 90. And you mentioned the rumors, Craig, on my way back, because we were here, we wrapped up at 11:30, everybody was home, and the phone call came, Castro's died, come back to work. I sent out the tweet, hey, this is what's happening, tune in for the very latest, and people were asking me on Twitter, for real? Is it true this time? You know, it almost seems like, is it true this time? Because
All right, I'm good.
so many times, especially
Glad.
lately with